Good evening and welcome to another Hot Topic where we discuss the issues of the day affecting the people of East Yorkshire and Northern Lincolnshire. How could we make the devolution deal work for all of Yorkshire? Following the government's devolution deal with Sheffield, there are concerns that the breakup of Yorkshire could jeopardise the future of the county's rural heartlands and the industry around the Humber. The government is weighing up how to give regions more power with increased responsibility in areas such as healthcare, transport and job creation. Diana Johnson, Labour MP for Hull North, is urging Hull and the Humber not to be forgotten from the devolution deal, while Lord Haskins, chairman of the Humber Local Enterprise Partnership, has described it all as a bit of a muddle. A very polite man. He recently stated that he had concerns about how councils on either side of the Humber estuary appear to be heading in different directions over this issue. Here to discuss the Yorkshire devolution deal are my guests tonight, Ian Kelly, Chief Executive of the Hull and Humber Chamber of Commerce and an increasingly regular guest on this programme, and Stuart Arnold from Yorkshire First, a political party aiming for Yorkshire to have a regional government so that decisions that affect Yorkshire can be made in Yorkshire. Welcome to Hot Topic. I'm Hugh Richards. Before we start the discussion, here's what the people of Hull had to say on the devolution deal.
Well, I think it must be a good thing. You've got to have confidence in the councils, though. And the track record over the years hasn't necessarily been brilliant. But as I say, you have to have confidence in the councils. But generally, I think it's a good idea.
I don't know, yeah, that's really good, obviously, because we're one of the less looked at cities, aren't we? But obviously, all the focus is on London, it's one of the major cities, so yeah, it'd be good if more decisions could be made for us.
I'm not too sure what to think, really. I wouldn't want too much money to be spent on the councils sort of doing their own thing. If it's cheaper to be in London, I'd be happy for it to be decided by London.
Sounds like a good idea to me, really. The divide is really very big, isn't it, between the north and the south. So I think if the north had more say, we'd probably get more money.
We'll have more say over what gets spent and where it gets spent.
Well, I think that Hull doesn't get the money that it should get from the main government, and I think the government should be more aware of this city of culture town, which Hull is. And when they are more aware what kind of a good town it is, then they should finance it more, because it's a great place, as you can see.
I think it's a great idea. They should do. Get more funding into this area. Hopefully we would anyway.
Stuart, can I start with you? Why is devolution important for Yorkshire?
Well, I think there's three things coming into place at the moment, Hugh. There's incredible centralisation of the United Kingdom anyway, especially England, and I think the view is that it's one of the most centralised countries in Western Europe. The second thing is that there is this north-south divide. That's quite evident, and that's been picked up by the government itself, to be fair, and governments over time have actually tried to create a kind of a more balanced economy between the two parts of the country. But I think that's been exaggerated over the last years because of the economic crisis that we've had, that the north is falling even further behind the south. And the third thing is that already some parts of the United Kingdom are seeing devolution. Obviously Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and even London have a degree of powers which enable them to get on and do their own things. And I think those three things coming into place mean it's probably time to look at England itself, or the rest of England outside of London, and see what we can do about devolution. And there is a stirring, no more than that, in respect of what the government wants to do in the north, and particularly Yorkshire. But we obviously want to push that debate and that discussion further. Yeah,
that idea of that's predicated on a couple of things. Firstly, that centralised government is a bad thing, and we're an island. We're all pretty close together within a 600-mile long island. Very centralised government has been tremendously successful in France, where it's been pretty much governed from one central office in Paris since Napoleon, and it's predicated on the idea that this devolution, because Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and London have a degree of devolution, then it must be a good thing. There are plenty of people in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and London who deeply regret the idea of devolution.
Well, I think if you put them to a vote now, especially in Wales, which was actually very tight in terms of favour of an assembly in Wales, if you remember back in the referendum there, But if you went back now, I think, and said to them, we're taking your assembly away, do you agree with that? I think that overwhelmingly people support the idea of a Welsh assembly. And I think that's beginning to take hold in the north as well. I think the problem is that for just about every decision that we have to make in Yorkshire, even local councils have to go down to London to get a decision from some civil servant very often behind a desk about whether it's, for example, even something like how many times you can empty a bin. As the local council has to decide, can't decide on its own. It has to take up whatever Eric Pickles or whoever his successor is on that decision. But it's the bigger issues as well. Things like health, education, environment, transport. Why are they micromanaged from a desk in Whitehall when it's evident that the people in Yorkshire, just as they can in Scotland and Wales, can do a job much better?
Ian, the British civil service tends to be staffed by well-educated, intelligent and thoughtful people, and I expect they do sit behind desks quite often, but why is somebody in Yorkshire more qualified to work out how those services could be delivered than somebody, desk-bound or not, sitting in Whitehall?
Well, I think devolution, if it's done right, and that's the big debate at the moment, I wouldn't disagree with you on the benefits of some devolution, but it is about finding the right place and the right people in the right situation. And if you've got talented people in the locality who understand the issues, then they may well be the right people to be making the decisions going forward. So a lot depends on the particulars of how you structure your devolution, but if you do get talented people who know the issues better in a locality, it can generate better policies.
So you're from a business point of view, you understand management probably better than anybody else does. You would suggest that it's the person closest to the ground, the person closest to the problem is the person best qualified to find its solution.
Well, in the given, depends on, as I say, on the given circumstances. You do need people who can, for example, though, take strategic decisions, see the helicopter view at times, as well as just coming at an issue from a worm eyes sort of angle and the immediate issues they face. So you do need the right quality of people in the right places to make the right decisions.
Stuart, the other places where there's devolution, there's a sort of national, political, long historical, cultural difference between Scotland and England. I was quoting somebody the other day just saying that the only reason the Scots hate the English is because the English can't be bothered to hate them back. The Welsh are different. I mean, even ethnically, racially, there are differences after all this time where we've been huddled on this small island. But England, within England, there isn't that sort of cultural national difference. Or are you suggesting that Yorkshire has somehow is a quasi-nation as well as being a region of England?
Yeah, quasi-nation sounds quite good. I think Yorkshire has a sense of identity, a sense of community that goes back, well, 1,000 years. The boundaries of Yorkshire haven't changed that much over 1,000 years. And I think wherever you go in the world, there's a certain cognizance about what Yorkshire means. And I think so in other words, if you're starting a process of devolving powers, what makes sense in terms of critical mass of people, in terms of population, economy and that sort of thing? And it's key that, a fact that you've got a population in Yorkshire which is just about the same as Scotland, 5 million people. So if it's good enough for Scotland, it's certainly good enough for Yorkshire. And an economy pretty much the same size.
Well, an economy about twice the size of the Welsh economy,
exactly
just within Yorkshire. But by that logic, then maybe there should be a sort of separatism completely for the whole of the old Dane law. The part of the country with Viking place names should be separated from the parts of the country with Anglo-Saxon place names, and that sort of that sense of identity and separateness, if that's sufficient to justify a differing idea of government is...
Well, I think there is a historical analogy that we could possibly take too far, but I just think even in terms of branding, and it's something I work on at the university, in the business school there, in terms of the brand of Yorkshire, it has a very strong sense of identity. You can, in terms of export and that sort of thing. So it has, I think, a sort of a global recognition.
Is that true, Ian, that people around the world recognise that? They know what to expect from somebody from Yorkshire, do they?
Well, there's two things I would say as a man who was drinking a cup of Yorkshire tea this morning and enjoying it, and as a member of Yorkshire Cricket Club, the Yorkshire brand is strong, and Yorkshire has a political identity and a brand identity, which I applaud, but it is also the size of a mid-sized European nation, and you could argue that is that the way to generate the best economic growth if you bring the economy into it. Now, your old boss Mike Jackson was with me on the Hull Boundary Commission report which published last week, and made it clear that actually the key economic unit in this part of the world is the Humber.
Join us after the break and we'll be continuing this discussion of Yorkshire. Welcome back. Still with me in the studio, my guests Ian Kelly from the Hull and Humber Chamber of Commerce and Stuart Arnold of Yorkshire First. Gentlemen, I think just before we go any further, we're just going to have a quick look at what Diana Johnson, the Labour MP for Hull North, had to say about this matter.
Well, the Northern Powerhouse is a nice kind of short, snappy title for something that the government talk a lot about. It's not really clear what they mean. I certainly think there's great potential in the North for economic regeneration and to play a fuller part in the life of the country. But it's rather frustrating because whilst the government talk a lot about it, actually delivering on it is a different matter. So, for instance, as an MP in Hull, I'm constantly having to remind ministers about Hull being one of the great cities of the North and to make sure that we get our fair share of investment. So, for instance, we're City of Culture 2017, and yet in the recent autumn statement, the Chancellor only made £500,000 available to City of Culture in additional money, but he gave over 300 million to arts and the culture in London. So actually, I think the deeds of the government don't match up to their rhetoric in terms of the Northern Powerhouse and supporting it. We welcome the electrification of the Transpennine route, that's great, but it goes from Liverpool to Hull. And the scheme the government came up with, it actually was going to finish in Selby, which made no sense at all. So Hull has put together with First Hull Trains a package of private money to pay for that last bit to be electrified. But we're struggling still with the government because they haven't said yes to that, and yet it's a win-win for everybody. It's a win for the government, private sector money, and it's a win for local passengers. But unfortunately, the Department of Transport seem to be bogged down in this. And again, it's about making the case for the North. For us in Yorkshire, there's lots of issues that we need to address. Obviously, Hull and the Humber has worked very well in the last few years in terms of the Humber and the Humber estuary, the energy estuary. So we want to keep that. But also we know that Yorkshire as a county has, in terms of PR terms and a recognisable brand, is very attractive. But it's about having a proper discussion with business and local people and trade unions to get an idea of what would work best for us, because I'm not sure at the moment we've identified that properly. I'm certainly very pro the Humber. I think we've worked well together over the last few years. We've delivered on the renewables agenda. We've got Siemens into Hull. We know on the South Bank there's great work going on there around renewables. So I think we would lose a lot if we didn't keep together. But I also recognise, actually, the brand of Yorkshire's powerful. And I think if we could do a deal together, that would be really the best way forward. But what's also happened is we know that the Sheffield City region's already been created and agreed by government. So a little bit of Yorkshire's already gone off to work with other parts of North Derbyshire and into other parts of the country. And that worries me because that has already broken up what could have been quite a good model. So again, I'm frustrated that we've been forced by artificial deadlines by the government to come up with proposals.
And so there's Diana Johnson warning of the dangers, or possibly the risks anyway, of a split between the industrial Humberside part of the region and the rural Yorkshire part of the region. Ian, you were just talking about exactly that differences in the two economies.
Diana's absolutely right. She attended a meeting of the Hull Boundary Commission, the Great and Good, who reported on this a few weeks ago with the support of Inlagov from Birmingham, so outside civil service support, which made two recommendations. One is that Hull and East Riding should consider merging because they are a single economic unit, and actually the Humber is the functional economic region for this part of the world, and as Jim O'Neill, the Treasury Minister, is saying, the Northern powerhouse needs to be built on functional economic units, city regions across that northern powerhouse area, from Liverpool through to Manchester, to Leeds, to Hull, and with Sheffield and Newcastle added on. So city regions, functional economic units, and this has been ours. The river has been the driving economic force for wealth and prosperity in this part of the world for 1,000 years, and certainly administratively in recent years too.
Would you say, Stuart, that the economic blocks are not the same as the old cultural blocks or the old county borders of Yorkshire, that the economic blocks don't follow the same lines as county devolution? Well, I think if devolution is going to work properly, it's got to be more than just about economics, and I'm afraid that's all it is at the moment. The devolution that's being offered by George Osborne is no more than a bit of local economic management. It's not proper devolution as I would understand it. It has to include, for example, elements of social policy, and it has to include democracy and accountability, neither of which we have under this deal. But where do you draw the geographical lines? I mean, it has to include democracy, it has to include accountability, and I wouldn't dismiss the economics so much. It's not much fun flying the white rose flag if you're hungry, but is democracy within the ridings of Yorkshire excluding Humberside, or democracy, and then a separate democracy within Humberside, or would you want the whole thing to be one? I was going to say sovereign state, but one political unity, one polity. Well, I think you have to draw the boundaries somewhere, and as I said, you have fairly firm and consistent boundaries with regard to what Yorkshire is about. It's true that we could be having a discussion. I'd like to have a bigger discussion about what really works in terms of devolution, because there are some in Sheffield and some in Leeds who think that the city region is the way forward. And of course, if they do go that way forward, then that does exclude Hull and the East Riding. So the option is very much to have, as Sheffield seems to be going its own way, the rest of Yorkshire, what called a Greater Yorkshire, as a single...
Or half of Yorkshire.
Yeah, it's, well, greater in inverted commas. We'll talk about the various options that the government's offering.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think there is a danger that, well, that we sort of over-egg the Humber as an economic unit. I think that, well, I know there are more people that drive from Hull and the East Riding into work in York and Leeds every day than actually cross the bridge to go into North and North East Lincolnshire, and certainly even less. It's a tiny fraction of people in terms of labour mobility go south to north, and therefore it works to a certain extent, but I think there is a danger in over-egging it, and I think the local authorities in Lincolnshire recognise that, and that's why they decided their own kind of combined authority is the way to go. Ian, Hull and the Humber is a sort of dormitory town for people who really want to go and work further north in Yorkshire proper.
Well, there are 50,000 commuters in from the East Riding into Hull every day. That's a big unity between the two economies there. The problem is, as this Boundary Commission pointed out, you have a bipolar political problem with a Tory council wanting to look north into North Yorkshire, right up towards Thirsk and North Allerton, and of course Hull, where, you know, sort of as we pointed out, that combined single economy of Hull and East Riding, the Greater Hull, if you go halfway out into East Riding, still has an affinity across the Humber and through the ports that exist around the Humber. And, you know, if we have the bizarre situation of East Riding going off with fellow Conservative councils into North Yorkshire, breaking up the Hull economic unit, then Hull will be a Billy No-Mates, who cannot survive, especially if its future income is predicated on business rates, which are supposed to be devolved, and 40% of Hull's business rates sit in the current East Riding. So Hull as an economy could collapse on the current set of politicking by local authority leaders who are manoeuvring on the basis of party politics and parochialism with that worm-eyes view, rather than taking a strategic economic view about what will assist the Northern Powerhouse grow the economy. And this is a juncture for the Hull and Humber City region with renewables over the past 5 years, where the four authorities have worked together. They've seen growth and prosperity build with renewables. renewables, and there's more opportunities out there for inward investment and building our energy estuary brand. But if we allow this parochial politicking from these council leaders following their party political colours to divide the Humber rather than build on what we've done successfully over the past 5 years, enormous damage will be done. An enormous number of people will find that the economic potential and job opportunities will be missed and lost.
From what Ian describes it, we are lions led by donkeys here, Stuart. I mean, is that the internal politics of each of these councils wishing to preserve their own bailiwick? Is that one of the problems that you're trying to address?
Yes, I think that's fair to say, because it's very difficult to sort of rest the hands of the local politicians off the levers of power, and that seems to be what's going on at the moment. There is an opportunity, as I said, to have a conversation that includes the folk of Hull and the East Riding, but also in a wider context across Yorkshire. Say, well, what is the best option here? And I think it's a much easier sell to say the strategic decisions about economic development and education, health, etc., could be taken at a Yorkshire level. It's a much easier sell for the people of the East Riding and Hull, that they would join in with that element rather than combine. I think, as we saw, Ian, it's going to be very difficult to sell the idea of a combined authority between Hull and East Riding to the good folk of Willoughby and Cottingham and Kirkella and so on.
In fact, shall we come back to that in a moment? We're going to have to cut to a break there, gents. But there is a difference in what the different people in different parts of the county want. But we'll come back to that after this break. Please join us again. Welcome back. I'm still with Stuart Arnold and Ian Kelly talking about the possibility of devolution for Yorkshire. Just before we broke, gentlemen, we were saying that different populations in different parts of the county might have different attitudes to what sort of governance, local governance they want. Ian, I think you were about to comment on that.
Stuart, you make an honest and genuine point about where you, me, Geoffrey Boycott, Joe Root could enjoy a cup of Yorkshire tea and say that is a unit politically, which we could sell to the world. The simple fact is that we are where we are with a government that we have and has set the ground rules, and already Sheffield has decided to go in a city region unit, just as Manchester has done and just as Liverpool have done, within the Northern Way parameters that the Chancellor has already set. So we are where we are. Yorkshire has already gone. That game is a busted flush, and Greater Yorkshire is in reality only half of Yorkshire. The key point about the economic dimension, which does matter alongside the political, is even when we had Yorkshire Forward, it operated 4 distinct city regions or sub-regions. One was Leeds, one was Sheffield, one was North Yorkshire with York, and the other was the Humber, which was in a Yorkshire and Humber unit region which the government operates. So in that sense,
it's gone.
The Humber has not gone. The Humber is still here. It's not
an option on the table, because there is no question that the government is going to say there's a Humber city region. It's just not on the table. The only options are either a Greater Yorkshire
at the moment,
or nothing.
Greg Clark came to my chamber 6 years ago when the local authority politicians were again fighting like rats in a sack, and we created the Humber LEP, and that's the excellent work that's been going on in the past 6 years, building the renewables agenda and the energy estuary. So when you add other stakeholders, rather than just 4 local authority leaders with their own parochial views, some of which did not even consult their own cabinets or political parties or councillors before they took this decision to try and break up the Humber for political reasons.
Let me put the crucial question to you.
So the rest of us and the MPs and the rest of us as stakeholders are now getting into the argument, and we may well see the Humber come back on the table, as Diana quite rightly and Melanie on says ought to happen.
This is
as does Nick Dakin
and
others.
$64,000 question. Do you advocate the return to Humberside as a unit of local government?
No, absolutely no. And the public out there need to appreciate that what the business community is saying is no, we do not want a Humberside County Council. What we're saying is we do not want to break up the Humber as an economic unit where the councils work together in a partnership arrangement. And this is where you have the problem of What the local authorities are positioning themselves for is, because of cuts, they're terrified they're going to have to merge with other councils after the next election. So they're positioning themselves to fellow councils, often of the same colours, so that when they merge, it'll be a positive a process as they can manage. That is a separate issue altogether about the Treasury's agenda of growth and prosperity in a northern powerhouse built around business people helping create the jobs and wealth which will sustain
you describe
this part of the world.
Local politicians here in exactly the same way a historian would describe the 17th century in the Holy Roman Empire, that it's tiny little unsustainable units protecting themselves from possible takeover from anything big. I'm not suggesting you're wrong,
but I could possibly comment.
Stuart, there was a point there where Ian was saying that as far as Yorkshire is concerned, as a unit of government, that ship has sailed.
Well, I think it's back on the table. I think it had sailed, to be fair. I think it looked like it was going to be the Leeds City region, Sheffield City region, and the rest ignored.
Leeds is coming through and we'll be there in March at the budget.
Well, we will see, because as you quite rightly pointed out, Ian, there's a very strong advocacy from the backbenchers of the Conservative Party. Those MPs representing North Yorkshire and the East Riding, which for the most part are rural and have been left out of this city region devolution deal, who are saying, come on, let's go for it, let's have a greater Yorkshire. And I think that there is an appeal in that. And I have to say, the Sheffield City deal, although it's on the table, is not done by any means. And I can see a scenario where if the rest of Yorkshire forges ahead as a single unit, that Sheffield will say, oh, hang on, maybe we should be part of that. Maybe we will scrap the city deal and go with Yorkshire. And Sheffield have the same place as the Hull and the Humber. This is, as indeed in North Yorkshire, with across to Redcar and Middlesbrough. There is an economic dimension. There is a laxity, if you like, or across the borders of people working of economics. But as I said, the devolution, if it's realistic, has to be more than just economic. It has to be social and democratic.
Do we need extra layers of government? Because you wanted a layer of government that is a Yorkshire-wide layer of government. What would happen to the layers below that? I'm afraid you can't do anything about the layer above it, but what would happen to the layers below that? Because whenever you add an extra layer of government, then that's, apart from anything else, is expensive. That's somebody else you have to pay a tax to. That's somebody else taking money out of your pocket. Somebody else that has to be financed ultimately by business, trade, industry, the people who actually make money. So is it not an expensive idea?
Well, it's not popular, that's true. But as I said at the beginning, I think if you then look at the position that Scotland and Wales are in, that those parliaments and those assemblies in those countries are actually enormously popular now. And yes, it is an additional tier. And I'm afraid it's inevitable.
But you would have it as an additional tier, so you'd have district councils kept. And
yes, I think there would have to be, along the way, a review of local councils. It's not to take powers up from them to a sort of strategic Yorkshire level, but I think at the moment some of them are quite monolithic, and therefore you could start pushing powers further down to the towns and parishes, for example. Places like Pocklington, Market Wheaton and so on, who at the moment really don't do very much at all. I think, the same with the elected mayors. We're going to have some kind of tier of authority, if you like. So there is an inevitability. I just think it's much more democratic and accountable to have a parliament or an assembly.
We'll come to the nitty-gritty of mayors and assemblies and things like that, but subsidiarity within Yorkshire, the powers being pushed down, and I would assume a minimal increase in cost to business.
Well, indeed, in terms of what we're talking about, we're not talking about an elected layer at the Yorkshire level. That's an honourable argument, but I think that battle was lost with John Prescott and his regional assemblies argument under Labour. So it's an honourable argument, but tested by the public didn't work at that time. What we're saying in business is, this is the hand we're being dealt with. These are the things that have already happened in Manchester, Liverpool, Sheffield. In the Humber, we actually don't want to change anything definitively. We just don't want to see the break-up of the Humber, our economic unit and the fourth largest trading estuary in Europe, the largest in the UK. And what you can have is an elected mayor who just chairs the LEP, Local Enterprise Partnership, which Chris Haskins does now, chairs the Health Trust, and becomes the Police and Crime Commissioner too. And in
elected,
that sense,
an elected
it
mayor
involves nothing more than we currently have, and certainly doesn't involve any kind of Humberside council with more politicians.
And an elected mayor of where?
The Humber.
So Humberside, you mean?
No, it's not that. Yeah, the Humber is an economic unit, but it doesn't involve politicians, extra councillors, merging of the four current councils.
And who's the mayor accountable to?
The mayor is accountable to the public, which is what you have the election
Through
for.
how?
Yeah, because he's democratically elected.
Well, once every 5 years turns up and says, "Oh, well, this is what I've been doing for the fight." What about on a daily basis?
Well,
the mayor, even Boris Johnson has to go and talk to his assembly from time to time. So who's he going to talk to?
Well, in that sense, he can talk to the four sets of local authorities and to the stakeholders in health, in education, in the charitable sector and the business sector too. But he will have a democratic mandate to oversee that economic development, that health and that police and crime agenda, as well as coordinate the four local authorities for the greater benefit of the area.
So, but he's not he wouldn't be accountable to the four authorities because they couldn't kick him out. It's down to the people to do that. So what sort of level of accountability is there?
Well, it's the same broad principle that you're having in Manchester, where the combined authorities will sit round a table, create a cabinet of local authority leaders, of which the elected mayor will chair. But, as I say, the three additional responsibilities of democratic oversight that would be added would be that in terms of health, economic development at a strategic Humber level, and in terms of the Police and Crime Commissioner, which already covers Humberside, the old area as you described it.
Go on, Stuart.
No, I just find it astonishing. You know, we've moved on. It's almost as if the Scottish referendum never happened, because I was in Scotland, as I'm sure you may have been, during the referendum, and the engagement of the people was incredible. As we saw that in the final turnout, it was about 85%. You know, wherever I went, there were packed public halls, there were street meetings, there were online debates, there were debates on TV, there were debates through newspapers and so on. The engagement about what they wanted to see their Scotland to look like in the future was fantastic. And you're telling us that we just want a sort of vaguely elected mayor
what a contrast
across the Humber.
What has happened over this last summer, where Greg Clark went out to the four local authority leaders in the Humber, and between them, because they don't currently get on, they had a big fallout.
Well,
those four people broke up this Humber economic unit and went, leaving the shambles that we have.
We will discuss
the
internal politics of Yorkshire politicians in 1 minute. Have to go to a break. Please come and join us after the break, because it's getting quite exciting. Welcome back to the final part of this week's Hot Topic with Ian Kelly and Stuart Arnold. Why is it, gents, that these various authorities in Yorkshire can't even get their heads together? In Manchester they've done it, it's happening, there's a sort of, the powerhouse there is working. Newcastle, Sheffield perhaps, Leeds maybe. Yorkshire, absolutely not. David Cameron was overheard, he'd forgotten his mic was kept on. It's a quotation that will always be held against him. I'll just remind you of it. He said, the Prime Minister said, we just thought people in Yorkshire hated everyone else. We didn't realise they hated each other so much. Element of truth in that? I mean, from what you've been describing as the political situation between the authorities, then it seems to be...
Well, I've talked to my opposite numbers in chambers in these other great cities, and actually they say their arguments are just as heated. The difference is Manchester, they have had a bit longer to try and pull this together, and they've been blessed. They've been touched by the Chancellor and offered some cash and given a nudge in the right direction. And so from that point of view, they were first. They're setting that agenda. Liverpool, which has many similarities to the Humber, where the people of Cheshire on one side of the river have differences with your Liverpudlians on the other. But actually, they've pulled together now, and they are moving forward in a very positive way with their plans from Liverpool in terms of T2 on the economic side, and some really good stuff coming out of Liverpool. But here, you know, sort of we've got Sheffield who've got ahead of the game and done well for themselves. Got a bit of Derbyshire and North Nottinghamshire too, and Leeds are ready, but are being held back because of this other bit of Yorkshire and this attempt by some politicians to break up the Humber, which is a purposeful attempt, which I'm pleased to see Greg Clark stop last time. Michael Heseltine supported him, and both of them, I hope, still believe in the values of the Humber as a way forward, because that's where our growth and prosperity will come.
Stuart, there is some politics, maybe you can understand this better than I can, but after the general election last May, that before that general election, the offer had been that there would be a combined authority, and this is an offer made to the leaders of Yorkshire, and that combined authority would be able to create effectively a sort of a rural and urban zone of government. After the general election, once George Osborne, who's taking the lead on these things, realised that he had a majority government and he was no longer constrained by the coalition, then there was an insistence that that combined authority would have its elected mayor, and that they weren't allowed to get on with it without having that elected mayor, and that the combined authority would have a sort of a two-thirds veto majority rule over the mayor. What's going on here? I don't quite get that. Why is Osborne so keen on this elected mayor idea? I know you're keen on it as well.
Well, no, I'm not particularly. I think I'd still much rather have a directly elected parliament or assembly, and then a government, if you like, or a set of ministers.
So sort of miniature version of Westminster, as it were.
Well, a miniature version of Scotland, shall we say, that emerges out of that. So you could have a first minister or somebody senior to take on these roles. But I think the problem is that it's politics. It's exactly what Ian said, and I think politics in Yorkshire is fairly tribal, party politics anyway is, and I think possibly that George Osborne can see the idea that if there's a greater Yorkshire, it's possible that the mayor may actually not be a Labour politician. If it's just the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, there's every probability that there will be a Labour politician of some kind or another. But if he expands it out to take in the more rural areas, the more conservative areas, there's a thought that he might get his own way, and that breaks up the hegemony of Labour in the north, just as it's been broken in Scotland. And that, I think, is there's a certain tribal instinct in George Osborne that says this is a good thing.
There's a possibility that there is a bit of gerrymandering, effectively, that you want units of government that that aren't dominated by the party that you oppose.
Well, I think, so you can't be surprised if politicians look for political advantage in a process of this nature. But I think, as you say, there's two sets of arguments at work here. One is the future of local government in an austerity world where money is getting less, and who might they have to merge with? And surprise, surprise, Conservative council leaders want to merge or link up with fellow Conservative council leaders, and similar to the Labour ones. But you also have a different argument altogether about devolution, and the Northern Powerhouse tackling the north-south divide is about creating extra added wealth from the Northern Powerhouse to offset, sort of the fact that we're so much weaker than the South East and London economy. And if you are basing your arguments about how to make the Northern Powerhouse a success, it is about building on the functional economic units, and there is a big body of evidence you'll accept as an academic that city regions are the drivers of economic wealth. I'm not saying everyone agrees with that, but there is a big body of academic evidence, and as I say, if you're looking at it from a business and economic perspective, making the Northern Powerhouse successful, go with your functional economic units.
I think the Jim O'Neill's, and this is the city region idea, was very much based on the United States, where cities are paramount. Yeah. There's no question of that. I think we're in a different ballgame in terms of the UK, and especially England, and I just don't think it fits. It might fit Manchester, it might fit Birmingham, But I think Yorkshire is of a different nature, economically, socially, and then every other, and
But
culturally.
you're comparing apples and pears. You're talking about counties. You could talk about Lancashire equally as well as Yorkshire. You either go on the basis of city regions, and we're halfway there already on that front. You can't then change over on this side of the Pennines and go for
no, you can do.
something
We can do
different
exactly. We can do
administratively,
exactly
which
what
is-
we
is
want.
counties,
We can do
you
exactly
know.
what we want. It should be our choice. If the people of Manchester want to go that way, they should be able to have a referendum and say we want a city region with an elected mayor. By coincidence, just a few years ago, the people of Manchester said in a referendum, no, we don't actually want a directly elected mayor, as indeed did parts of Yorkshire. Look, the example I would give of why Yorkshire works as a whole is the Tour de France. Not only did we get the Tour de France in the first place against the government's preferred option, which was Scotland for political reasons, but when it came, Yorkshire actually did a very good job. And if you look at the stages that we placed here, they were combining cities, towns, the countryside, small villages. In a nutshell, that was what Yorkshire is all about. And the irony is that with regard to tourism, that's one of the very few areas where Yorkshire has the autonomy to get on and do things. And so you think if you can do that
in the
at that
nicest
level,
of respects, the cycle race was quite pleasant. Nearly bankrupted Welcome to Yorkshire, but forget about that for a moment. I'm a lot more interested in generating 1 million extra jobs over the next 5 or 10 years, based on what we can do in terms of inward investment and growing our businesses.
Tens of millions of extra money to the region.
Let's get off the Tour de France.
In terms of a whole renewables industry, which can create £100 billion worth of business
we're not turning
in the
our
North
backs.
Sea if we don't break up the Humber as an economic unit. And so your tens of millions for your cycle race is nice. The £100 billion is the prize in offshore renewables.
How is that?
If we keep
How
our
is the Yorkshire
economic unit
Assembly
together.
going to break up the idea of a renewable estuary?
Well, the Humber is about to be broken up by this little clique of politicians following party political purposes instead of listening to the business community and building in what already is here and works as an already generated 6 billion of investment from Dong and the 300 million of investment at Siemens, because we are an economic unit that those inward investors recognise and want to work with.
But those links
That's
across
real jobs,
across
real wealth, not a cycle race.
Till that's a Sagari Verity.
Nothing wrong with the cycle race. Go on, Stuart. Sorry.
I just don't think that the Humber estuary as a economic unit is going to disappear just because there is a Yorkshire Assembly or Parliament. You've got to understand that these things go on. But I think, as I said before, you're slightly over-egging the importance of the labour mobility, for example, across the Humber. People don't travel across the Humber just because there's a job in Hull from Grimsby.
Last time
very,
I
very
noticed,
few
as
do.
we and others helped reduce the bridge tolls down to £1.50, that actually movement across the Humber has gone up 30%. But the key fact, for example, as we sit here in Grimsby, as we sit here in Grimsby's, 85% of the business rates in this town come from the Humber Bank estuary factories, refineries and ports, and the trade that goes through these ports, and that wealth and prosperity built around the Humber as a cluster of businesses is much more important.
We're going to have to end there, Ian. Very quick
Picking
last word.
Last word. Turnips round Lincoln.
Last word from you, Stuart. Very quickly, I'm afraid.
I think this has been a very interesting discussion. What is evidence, above all, is that there are differences of opinion. We need that conversation in Yorkshire.
Absolutely, we do. And thank you very much, gentlemen, for a programme in which we've acknowledged that there's a possibility that some Yorkshire politicians are tribal. Thank you very much, both of you. Please join in the discussion on Twitter using the hashtag HotTopic, double T. Email your news on Hot Topic to news@estuary.tv. And until next week, good night.